There is a new loot and it is insane. Apparently loot plushies haven't hit their sales goal yet, so Wizards of the Coast will continue to pump loot's power until economic conditions are met. To help facilitate that, this video will provide you a full loot the Pathfinder EDH deck, as well as alternatives to make you love loot at all costs. Loot the Pathfinder is a 5 mana value, 2/4 Beast Noble. It has Double Strike, Vigilance, and Haste. It has 3 exhaust abilities, and if you don't know what exhaust abilities are, they are activated abilities that you can only use once per game. This isn't a new thing, but it is now codified as a mechanic. Some of the most well-known pre-exhaust exhaust cards are Captive Audience, Garth One-Eye, and Demonic Pact. Anyways, Loot has 3 exhaust abilities, each costing 1 mana of his color identity. The green ability adds 3 mana of any one color. The blue ability lets you draw 3 cards, and the red ability has Loot deal 3 damage to any target. So yes, that's Black Lotus, Ancestral Recall, and Lightning Bolt. These are all very powerful abilities, but their use is limited by the exhaust mechanic. This deck will aim to circumvent that by blinking Loot with several untap abilities to make sure you get as many abilities per blink as possible. In the description below, you'll find the link to the full deck list, as well as several ways to support the channel. Without further ado, let's do some new Loot goofing. The first section is only one card, and that card is Elvish Refueler. Since Exhaust is a relatively new mechanic, it doesn't have a ton of support, and as of this video, not all cards from Aetherdrift have been spoiled, so it's possible there are other cards that may support Exhaust, but for now the only one I would run is Elvish Refueler. Since Exhaust only lets you activate those abilities once per game, Elvish Refueler lets you cheat your abilities. You can reactivate an Exhaust ability that's already been used, provided it's the first Exhaust ability of the turn. You can also just start stacking +1/+1 counters on itself, one every turn, but that doesn't seem that smart of an investment, but desperate times will call for desperate measures. During the production of this video, Ranger's Refueler was spoiled and it's pretty good, but the deck was already done and images and stuff were already placed, yada yada yada. If you want to run it in this deck, I don't think that's a bad call at all. The other way to reset Loot is to blink it out of existence and return it to life. When a card is blinked, it's considered a new game piece, so the once per game limit on Exhaust is checked against this new instance of Loot, and they're all basically refreshed. And I run 8 in total, 4 spells and 4 permanents. Teferi's Time Twist, Splash Portal, Siren's Ruse, and Essence Flux are all cheap blink effects. They have a few different effects, but most of them aren't really relevant to Loot, or are pretty inconsequential. Now for the permanents, we start with Thassa, Deep Dwelling, and Conjurer's Closet, both of which will automatically trigger a blink at the beginning of your end step. Since Loot has haste, you can use his exhaust abilities in between blinks, if you happen to have both of these in play. Finishing the blink permanents is Deadeye Navigator and Displacer Kitten. Deadeye Navigator is a blink staple that will allow for almost at-will blinks of Loot. And while Deadeye Navigator is really good, Displacer Kitten may be the deck MVP. We run a lot of instants and sorceries to reset, untap, or protect Loot, so you'll want to practice weaving them all together on the stack to get maximum production from Loot. I run 6 spells that will untap Loot, letting you get the most out of Loot's abilities, as quickly as possible. Legolas's Quick Reflexes, Shore Up, and Gift of the Viper will all untap Loot at the cost of 1 mana, and will also provide some level of protection, either through Hexproof or +1/+1 counter, in addition to the other utility that these provide. Fleeting Reflection, Dramatic Reversal, and Boon of Beseiju are 2 mana value instants that will untap Loot, as well as provide other utility. Pay close attention to Boon of Beseiju, which will at least give Loot +5/+5. That combined with Loot's haste and double strike can lead to a player elimination in the blink of an eye. I run 11 cards that are permanents that will untap Loot, allowing more consistent exhaust activations. Seeker of Skybreak, Cure's Follower, and Epheto Alchemist are all 2 mana value creatures that simply let you untap another creature. Thousand Year Elixir and Retreat to Korlheim are 3 mana value untappers. The other ability on Thousand Year Elixir won't really affect Loot specifically, but can be handy with some of your other creatures. Sereth the Viper's Fang and Kior, Master of Depths, are 4 mana value tools that can untap Loot. I'm particularly curious on how well Sereth will work as a protection for Loot in the long term. I'm kinda iffy on it, but you know, if it works, that's great. I then run 4 5 mana value untappers, starting with Seedborn Muse and Chakram Retriever, both of which will automatically untap your Loot, either on each other player's untap step or after casting a spell on your turn. Chakram Retriever is another case where you want to practice stacking your mechanics so that you can make the most of your untaps and blinks. I finish out the permanent sources of untapping with Gandalf the Grey and Disciple of the Ring. Gandalf will untap, but also works as a blink target after you use all of his effects. In a way, he's kind of a proto-loot, the original loot. Disciple of the Ring will be able to make use of those untap and blink instants, providing some counter magic on a stick. As my primary win condition will be to use Loot's double strike ability to try win through commander damage, it behooves us to run some things that will allow Loot to be unblockable. K9 Mark I and Aqueous Form are both 1 mana value ways to enable a Covert Loot. Bonus points for K9 since if it isn't making Loot unblockable, it's giving Loot Ward 1. Psychic Paper and Brotherhood Regalia are both 2 mana equipments that make Loot unblockable, as well as provide some ward. Loot can win through commander damage and potentially machine gunning its lightning bolt ability. However, by increasing its power, we can avoid having to rely on chip damage and make for quicker wins. Tyvar's Stand and Silk Guard will buff Loot, but also provide some protection. This can allow Loot to attack into an obvious removal spell situation, counter it, and then have lethal damage. Balduvian Rage and Lunar Frenzy are more aggressive, especially with Lunar Frenzy giving trample, but both of these are fine, and when was the last time you used a Balduvian anything? Part of our strategy is having not a ton of essential pieces on the board, so I run a bit more wipes than I normally do, 8 in total. We'll start with Curse of the Swine and Blasphemous Act, both of which are kind of defensive wipes. Curse of the Swine because you don't really wipe the board as plenty of blockers can still be left over, it's more to remove problematic abilities and effects on creatures. Blasphemous Act in a similar way is kind of a last-ditch effort, since it will nuke your loot in addition to everything else. From there we go to Artifact and Enchantment wipes with Brotherhood's End, Essence Filter, and Fade from History. There are a lot of enchantment and or artifact wipes in Temur, so feel free to run what you like. Lastly, we have 3 wipes that are asymmetrical, leaving your loot around to run wild like Hulkamania. I should note that Hulk Hogan absolutely sucks. I should also note that Displacement Wave is nice to cast with X being 4, bouncing everything but loot. This doesn't work if your opponents have big boys out, but it will devastate token strategies as well as small creature decks. Loot is really important for this deck, so in addition to all the tangential protection we run just straight up counterspells. Though I do prioritize low mana value over concrete counterspells, and I run 8 of them and they're all 1 to 2 mana value and will counter a wide variety of things, focusing mostly on protecting your own loot. If you have the amazing insight that free counterspells would be better, congrats, you cracked the EDH code. I too know that free counterspells are very good, and to prove it, I'll put one here with the arrow thing to denote that you can swap in free counterspells instead of cheap ones. Loot costs 5 mana, which means I'm okay touching into the 3 mana value ramp, since that will still curve to 5 mana on turn 4, so you're still accelerating 1 turn ahead. I run 3 of these, which are Honored Heirloom, Patriarch Sealed, and Somberwalled Sage. Honored Heirloom will give you some graveyard denial, which you don't really have anywhere else in this particular build. Patriarch Seal will give you another permanent that will untap loot. And Somberwalled Sage has a mana generation ratio of 3 to 3, 3 in, 3 out. This can be useful as it will let you cast loot on turn 4, while keeping one of your lands untapped for a 1 mana value loot activation or protection spell. I run Simic and Izzet Signet because I run green and I don't need a ton of artifact ramp. Besides of course Arcane Signet and Soul Ring. That's right, they're back. After my year without, they have returned. Should I have another video goal to remove them from my decks for another year? Let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can come up with something fun. Rounding out the ramp is 5 2 mana value green land ramp and a cheeky Birds of Paradise because Birds of Paradise are cool and they work well with a lot of the permanent untap effects to generate extra mana. I run 5 utility lands that are pretty impactful to loot. Well, except Dust Bowl, which has nothing to do with loot, it just continues to be the best land in all of EDH. Namo School at Water's Edge will give you another permanent untap effect, but just for legend, so it's primarily just for loot. Rogue's Passage will help you get loot in unblocked. 4 to activate is a little expensive, but remember that you can use some of Loot's mana ability to pay for it. Kessig Wolfrun is another X power buff, but this time it's repeatable. And lastly, Command Beacon. Loot will be a target pretty quickly, and if it gets killed a few times, it can be pretty expensive to recast. This will save you a hunk of mana. For mana, I run 7 of each Simic, Gruul, and Izzet dual lands. I run the best you got. I also run 4 lands that will generally get me any color that I might need. Finally, I run 3 forests, 2 islands, and 1 mountain. And that's my take on Loot the Pathfinder. Not only is it very powerful, it's a good way to learn and master stacking effects to get the most out of them. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon to further support the channel. And until the next video, I'll see you around.